Hello, I'm Evans Mayhew. I'm the founder of FastFulcrum and a renegade professor. Um, Thought it might be fun to do a bit of an origin story on FastFulcrum. I I was an adjunct professor for almost 17 years. This was at a pretty prominent university and taught in a multitude of different areas, different disciplines. So I taught in technology, specifically security. I taught in telecommunications. I taught in science. I taught in leadership. I taught in organizational behavior. And one of the things that started to become apparent to me was that I loved the experience. The people were absolutely wonderful, loved interacting with the students. One of the things that became apparent to me was that education as it stands today is very much still running on the same rails as it has since its inception. So it came from an industrial paradigm, and then it contributes to an industrial paradigm. And I don't really think that that's where we need to be in order to be competitive in the world that's beginning to shape up. So things are changing very, very quickly, and they're only going to become more so. And so I think that we have to adapt and evolve and be able to educate ourselves in ways that will help us to remain relevant. More on that later. So during the time that I was an adjunct professor, I also served as an academic director. So this was over a couple of different programs full time. It was the Masters of Technology Management, and then it was also the Leadership Masters program. This catered to working professionals. I was also an interim director over CIS and telecommunications and another lesser program to a smaller degree. But one of the things that came to my attention, the very, very early acorn of FastFulcrum, one of the first seeds that planted in my mind about the need to be able to pivot and shift, that came in the form of trying to assess what we needed to convey to our professional students. And the market was starting to change, and technology enables that. And so I came up with this idea of what I was calling at the time. I was calling it morphic curriculum, and I still really don't know what that means. So it would have to work. It would be very, very complex, and I never really fully mapped it out. And still to this day haven't totally cracked that nut. But it would enable the student to be able to change as they moved through their desired curriculum to be in lockstep with the market, hopefully, when they came out at the end of a program. It would be very, very difficult and a very tailored and individualized approach. So I don't know how that would work exactly, but still, that's where things kind of started, where my head was at. This is back in 2006, 2007. Then you fast forward to a Fast Company article. This was back when Robert Safian was the editor. And he coined the term generation flux, looking not at a particular demographic age group, but looking at the need for professionals, for people in general, to be able to spin up skills to adapt and evolve to meet a marketplace need. So that it would be very, very protean and morphic. They would have to change. So that got me cooking a little bit further, and that's been gestating in my mind for a while. But we aren't really trained to do that. Well, that's where I spun up FastFulcrum. Came up with the concept of creating a curriculum that will help students to be able to develop these skills and to hone these skills. And these are skills that set on top of traditional training. So yeah, I started with the Remain Relevant course, which lays the groundwork and explains the terrain within which we work, why we need to work, what are the different methods that we can use to adapt and to pivot. And then further in the curriculum within FastFulcrum, we get into developing contextual skill sets. So this is where you're breaking down your existing paradigms and beliefs as it pertains to education and taking on a new scope and focus as it pertains to education. Then we also look at creativity, look at curiosity. How can these be leveraged? A lot of times they're just considered to be soft and they kind of happen when they happen. But we harness them and weaponize them, if you will, to help you stay on your path to remaining relevant. And then there are other offerings, leveraging intelligence, which goes into no math, game theory, risk intelligence, and systems thinking. And then we also look into iconoclastic thinking. So how can you really think like a pirate, think like a rebel, think very, very differently? That's what's needed these days. Remain relevant has been a lot of fun. I have a large corporate client, and I've worked with some wonderful students, and have been able to help them to evolve. And if you want to check out some of the testimonials, they're over on my website at www.fastfulcrum.com. But one of the things that I sought to do, I was trying to figure out if you're standing at square zero, and you have to work with what you have. And I was talking to a friend of mine about this, and he said, "Oh, you're really describing Ikigai." So I started to delve into Ikigai. And Ikigai is a Japanese methodology wherein you unpack, it's a lot of self-examination and introspection, but it's not just navel gazing within this context. What we're doing is we're unpacking what you have to work with, and then you begin to relate it to the outside world. And again, that outside world is ever shifting. So you look at, what do you love? Or I unpack it as, what do you value? What do you respect? This is key. Back when I was doing competitive intelligence, a trick is, if you can figure out what somebody really values, they'll rarely act out of congruence, in non-congruence with that. What they will do is they'll act in alignment with their true values, regardless of what they say. Anyway, you unpack what your own values are, and that gives you a real strong sense of the space into which you can pivot and should pivot should you need to. Or if you choose to evolve where you stand, stay in the same position, etc., then it gives you a real strong clue along simply the avenues that you can most easily evolve. Then there are three other elements of Ikigai that we work with very closely. One is passion, what lights you up, stokes your goals. That's an easy path of least resistance to identify and to take advantage of. Then there's, of course, mission. Mission seems a little bit lofty, but if somebody walked up to you and said, "Hey, you got 90 days," and then you're dead, you might be figuring out what your mission is in life in a pretty big hurry. Then there's vocation, so your calling. What are you compelled to do? What do you feel drawn toward, and do you feel an obligation to do before they throw that shovel of dirt in your face? So if you look at those things, and all the elements of Ikigai cross-pollinate, and they should shift over time. So this shouldn't just be a one and done. It should be a constant process of reevaluation and examination. Then you look at profession. A lot of people, I think, rush to these articles. Leave your 9 to 5, leave the day-to-day grind, and they romanticize going out on your own. The grass is not always greener, period. A lot of times it's very hard scrabble. You jump over that fence and you find out that there's no such thing as utopia. In fact, the word utopia means no place, no such place. Anyway, we look at that. So you can grow where you're planted and figure out how to evolve. If you choose to pivot, that's phenomenal. You get the tools. But should you choose to stay where you are, you can grow there. Then on the outside edge of the lower part of the Ikigai diagram that we work with, we look at, what are you good at? So these are skills. We unpack those. We look at those very closely. We look at, why do you believe you're good at something? Did somebody else tell you? Do you need that affirmation, really? But I mean, why do you truly believe that you're good at it? Then you can look at what you can be paid for. In the age of the internet, that answer is everything. Clearly, just go out and poke around on the internet, poke around on eBay, look at Fiverr. You can get paid for anything. Then you roll out and you look at, what does the world need? And that's where we start to tend to focus outward at the market and at the world and what is needed. That's where we fold in SWOT. So I mentioned I had worked in competitive intelligence. We fold in strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that particular methodology and lens can be applied in a couple of different directions. So in the strengths and weaknesses, I encourage students to look at what their strengths are. Are they loyal? Are they focused? And then, so this is separate from the ikigai. What are you good at? That's your skills. So these are basically attributes you classify as strengths. Then to look at weaknesses. Why do you think that something is a weakness? And then we can also think about the other part of SWOT, which is opportunities. Do you have an opportunity to leverage a weakness or a perceived weakness into a strength? Then we go down to threats and opportunities. What is a threat? Clearly, a threat can be automation, and that's the general context. And speaking of context, we're looking at AI and automation here not as this big bugaboo. It's a catalyst for opportunity. It doesn't have to be a cataclysm. If we go back and we look at the research that started to come out of Oxford with Fry and Osborne back in 2013, 6 years ago, but that's an eternity in internet years, they began looking at the different occupations that exist and what the percentage of probability it was that those positions and occupations would be automated by 2032. Then you fast forward a few years to 2016, and then McKinsey did a fairly comprehensive study looking at 800 occupations, and then 2,000 tasks that cut across those 800 occupations. And it was a very large percentage at that time that could be automated with the tech that existed. But things have moved down the pipe, right, in the last 3 years. So things are getting more and more advanced, and capabilities are increasing. So that's definitely a threat. And I also see it as an opportunity, because it's the opportunity for us to adapt, to pivot, to evolve, to push ourselves. Look, it just is. And we're going to have a lot of benefit, tremendous benefit, that will come out of AI. However, there will also be impacts. And so we have to suit up and be ready to deal with those impacts on an individual and on a collective level. So we have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. We're starting to look at the outside world here. Then we shift out to an outer model. So it was PEST, political, economic, social, technological. One of my students, she said we should call it STEP, because that's more in line with the overall philosophy of my teaching. But yeah, if we go ahead and call it STEP, we look at the different components, the social components that we need to look at as it calls to why is automation being brought in? What are the impacts at a social level? Technological, clearly, that's the crux, that's the bedrock foundation upon which all these discussions are taking place. No technology, you wouldn't have any AI or any automation. But you can keep an eye on that and look at where developments are occurring and capabilities that are increasing. Then we have economic. There are economic benefits to artificial intelligence and automation and robotics. That's like falling out of a boat and hitting water. It's obvious. But you also have to look at some of the competitive dynamics that fold in to the economic piece, which is if company A is adopting AI and automation, and they're able to automate a lot of processes and things that people do, and they're able to increase efficiencies and lower costs and pass on value to their customers, and so they're increasing market share. And well, if you're company B and you're not doing that, you are at a significant disadvantage. And so you have now become compelled to adopt at least something that brings you into the same parity as with company A. So you've got this dynamic that's shifting over time. And I think that people need to keep a weather eye on that dynamic, and they need to consider it and then adapt and evolve appropriately, pivot. Then, of course, we have political. So if you look at the 2020 presidential race right now, automation is quite the hot potato. It's a very interesting topic. We're talking about jobs here, and that resonates with people at an individual level. So it's also good to remain apprised of what's happening there. Also, what we have is tribe. My friend, I mentioned earlier, my friend turned me on to the notion of ikigai. So he was a friend and a coworker. So what you have within tribe that we examine in the Remain Relevant course is you've got friends, and then you have family, and then you have co-workers and professional colleagues, and then you have people with whom you generally share interests. So this friend of mine who turned me on to Ikigai was a friend. He was also a co-worker, and we also share quite a few interests. And I have without a doubt, I've been laid off several times, and I've always been able to adapt and to pivot, and my tribe has never failed to come through and help me. And so what I think we need to do, and we do in the Remain Relevant course, is we unpack the individual's assets and arsenal. We look at, what are your professional assets? I always take them back to my first job when I was 14. I was a janitor, but I learned so much. And then I moved on to being a stock guy at a grocery store. Again, but I learned so much. And I think we take these things for granted. We roll down the road and these things make us up. I think it was Ralph Waldo Emerson who said, I'm paraphrasing here because I'm going to butcher it, but he said, the meals I have eaten and the books I have read, I cannot remember, yet still they have made me. We need to go back and think about the things that have made us, because this fabric is what can save us should we need to pivot and adapt and evolve further in this day and age of rapid change. So anyway, Remain Relevant is very, very close to my heart. I've really enjoyed it. I enjoyed building it. I've enjoyed delivering it and loved the interactions that I've had as a result. And I highly encourage people to go out and have a look. I can be found at www.fastfulcrum.com. And I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you in there.